and I'd done a little bit of research on productivity and focus methods, mostly for myself, just because it's a good skill to have in today's age, and I thought it would be a cool topic to share. So everyone's probably has a general idea of what productivity and focus is, but to put a clear definition on them, focus is how one concentrates on a task at hand, and productivity is the efficiency of the work being done. Obviously, these are super important when it comes to work. If we can't focus, we can't be productive, and our work won't get done. I'm sure everybody's had those days where you just can't seem to get anything done, and you welcome pretty much any little distraction because it's way more exciting than getting your work done. But then think about those times when you are able to focus and you get into kind of a flow, nothing's distracting you, and you're ticking task after task off of your list. You feel super productive. So I'm hoping this presentation will give you some tips and tricks to get into that flow as often as possible. But first, it's important to understand why it's hard to focus. There's a lot of reasons for this. Some of the most common reasons are distractions, lifestyle habits, and trouble organizing and planning what needs to be done. And on top of that, focusing is a skill. It needs to be trained in order to get better at. And the more you use it, the better we get at it. So distractions are a big reason for trouble focusing. It's important that I first explain that there's two different types of focus. There's top-down selective attention, which is intentional and goal-driven focus. You choose a task to focus on, and then you do it. And then there's bottom-up selective attention, which is our brain reacting to a stimulus. So, for example, we're working on something, and then we see a Slack notification pop up on our screen, and we decide to stop what we're working on and open that message and check it. So it's an involuntary type of focus, and it's often triggered by our distractions. You can probably already tell that the bottom-up selective attention can be a productivity killer, so it's important to limit it as much as possible. This can be hard as we live in a very distracting world. Just seeing our emails or Slack open or our phones can distract us from what we want to work on. On top of that, when we do try to focus on a task and it starts to get even remotely difficult, our brains welcome any sort of distraction as a way to escape the discomfort. So then you're in this constant struggle of diverting your attention from what you want to do to the distraction and trying to reorient yourself with the task at hand. You're wasting so much time trying to get back to the task that you're not being your most productive self. Good news though, there's a way to cope with distractions, most obvious being limiting your distractions. There's tools out there that can block distracting apps and websites, and there's settings on your phone and apps like Freedom and Cold Turkey Blocker that can help with that. You can also turn off notifications during the times you want to get deep focus times. A tip I found during my research that I love was to set specific times to look at emails and Slack notifications and all that, and reply to them during that time. Obviously, it's important to be available for urgent messages, but getting in the habit of not mindlessly checking these can save so much mental capacity for the tasks you actually want to complete. If your phone's a huge distraction, there's a psychology tip that has you place your phone 20 seconds away from where you're working. The idea is that your brain will not want to waste a 20-second journey to do a mindless scroll or look at your phone. And thus you'll start to look at it less and eventually not be conditioned to want to look at it or even think about it while you're in your focus periods. Another cool tip I found was to create a distractions list. The idea is to have a pen and paper handy and use it as a brain dumping station. Anytime you think of something you want to do or think about later that's unrelated to the task you're working on or trying to focus on, you write it down. And writing it down will make sure you can get back to it later, while also not opening a can of worms by using technology to save it for later. Another tip that seems so simple, but I've found to be super effective, is to make your workspace comfortable and clutter-free. If you have a space planned out to effectively get work done and it's clutter-free, you'll spend less time setting up a distraction-free workspace and can jump right into your focus periods. So I like to spend a few minutes after work cleaning up and prepping my space for the next day so I can just jump into my focus period the next day. And then the last tip I found to be helpful is working near productive people. It can be a way to divert the effect of distractions. Seeing others being productive can be enough motivation to be productive yourself. Lifestyle is another contributor to trouble focusing. And I'm sure everybody's heard by now that a healthy lifestyle promotes a healthy brain. And lifestyle habits are a pretty broad topic and unique to each person. So for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to briefly cover nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Poor nutrition can actually make it hard to focus, plan, and remember things. And an unhealthy diet can cause the body to create more stress hormones, which when activated constantly can lead to inflammation in areas of the brain associated with focusing, remembering things, and planning. Studies have shown that eating foods with omega-3 fats and avoiding foods with lots of sugars, artificial sweeteners, and trans fats can help protect your brain against this inflammation. As for exercising, it's been shown to increase energy levels, release endorphins, and increase blood flow throughout the body, which leads to better functioning of the brain, especially in the areas dealing with your mood, memorization, and focus. And last but not least, and probably the most important of these three, is sleep. The average adult needs 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep each night to help your brain and body repair itself, refresh itself, and feel alert again. Lack of sleep impairs your thinking, thus it'll be hard to focus. Organization, planning, and prioritizing your ideas, to-dos, and time are a huge component of being able to focus and be productive. Excuse me. Not having a clear plan on what to work on, in what order, and when can lead to feeling overwhelmed, which makes it even harder to stay focused because your attention will be jumping between tasks. That may feel productive, but it actually wastes a lot of time as you're constantly reorienting yourself to tasks. For the most part, monotasking is the most efficient way to work, in which you focus on one task at a time. This can be to completion or for a designated amount of time. And so for the next slides, I'm going to go over different workflows that can help with focus in general, monotasking, organizing, planning, and prioritizing your to-dos. We'll start off with some techniques to improve your focus. The most common one, and the one you all probably heard of at some point, is the Pomodoro technique. You basically work in intervals, and it's often suggested that it's 25 minutes of focus time followed by a 5-minute break. The break is important as it gives your brain a chance to recharge and come back ready to focus again. After a couple intervals, it's important to take a long break. So I mentioned focus is a skill that you can build on, and the beauty of an interval focus technique is that you can customize it to what your brain needs and can handle. So you don't have to stick to the 25 minutes on and 5 minutes off pattern. You can maybe start there and add 5 minutes to the focus period each week as your skills improve. It's important to keep these focus periods just long enough to retain focus, but also challenge your brain so that you can keep honing in on your focusing skill. Another thing to note here is that this technique is great for pretty much any kind of work. If you have lots of tiny tasks, you can knock out as many as you can in your workflows. And if you have a large task or a project to do, you can break it down into smaller chunks and designate one focus period at a time for each chunk. If you like the idea of working at intervals like the Pomodoro technique, but want a little spicier routine, you can try the 28-2 rule. It's 30-minute intervals, but for 20 minutes you sit, 8 minutes you stand, and 2 minutes you do some sort of movement. It ensures you aren't sitting all day and keep the blood flowing. This is where an adjustable desk could be pretty handy. And similar to the Pomodoro technique, this technique is great for all types of work. Now, if you have problems just starting work or procrastinating on items, the 2-minute rule might be perfect for you. The concept is simple. If a task takes 2 minutes or less to do, you just do it then. It usually takes more time to add it to your to-do list and grab the mental capacity later to do it than it does to just take care of it right then and there. I want to point out that this is a tool for your small miscellaneous tasks, like replying to a quick email, scheduling meetings, or making a quick edit to a doc. This can be helpful for those who like to procrastinate or have trouble starting work, as it gives you easy wins. Your brain feels rewarded when you cross things off your to-do list, so starting your work with a couple of things crossed off can be enough motivation to maintain your focus for the more difficult tasks. The next items are going to kind of outline how you can organize and prioritize your tasks to ensure your focus time is just focus time on the tasks. The first method is the getting things done, and it's super effective for those with really long lists of to-dos. Essentially, there's 5 steps, as you can see outlined. The first step helps you identify everything you need to accomplish that you can think of, big projects, small tasks, and everything else. Think of it as like a hodgepodge of thoughts in a brain dumping station. The goal is to write down anything you can think of as it comes to you so you don't lose it. And I highly recommend the pen and paper brain dump technique I talked about earlier for this. The next step is to actually dive into each piece you wrote down on your list. What is it? An action item, a project, trash? Do you need to break it down into smaller pieces to become actionable? If yes, then do it. And if it's not actionable, then it doesn't require your focus. Once you've identified it, you can move on to the next step, organizing it into a category. Your categories are tailored to what you need. For example, you could organize them by project or skill set or focus within each project. It's essentially what makes sense for you, and you might have to do a little trial and error to figure that out. The reflecting portion is simply maintaining the list, updating it, and making sure everything continues to flow correctly. Most sources suggest doing this at least once a week, but I found it more useful to spend a couple minutes a day, whether at the beginning or end, to maintain it. And the last step is to actually do the tasks. This method does not specify how you engage with the tasks, so it can reflect what makes sense to you. You can use the Pomodoro technique to try to knock out a category at a time, or knock out one item from each category at a time. But having that organized and categorized list of actionable items offers clarity and control over your day, as you have a clear pathway of execution. The next method is called task batching. The first step is once again listing the tasks you need to complete. And again, the tasks can be anything: big projects, small action items, anything you need to do. From there, you look at each task on your list and break it down into the most atomic process, aka tasks within the task. You want every item on that list to be an action item, not an overarching task with an ambiguous process. One of the best ways I found for me to break things down into their most atomic form is to create a brain dump of every step that could be involved in that overarching task. If I'm struggling or thinking of these, then I know I probably need to do more research to get familiar with the goals and processes involved in accomplishing that task. So then I'll make that task become a research task and outline what I'm trying to get out of that research. And then I make note to create actionable steps from that. Once I have all my action items, I then categorize them. And again, this is how you want to categorize them: project, skill set, focus within a project, whatever makes sense to you. From there, you can organize your schedule by categories. And Google Calendar is great for this because you can block off times and label them, so you have an accurate forecast of what and when you want your category focus times to be. During that category's designated time, the goal is to cross off as many items from that list as possible. This helps you limit the amount of time you spend on a project or category, making sure you can give attention elsewhere. It also helps prevent multitasking and switching back and forth between projects, which helps with the ability to focus, as you won't spend time acclimating to different mindsets or environments associated with the different projects. Time blocking is essentially how it sounds. You divide your day into specific blocks of time. You follow the same first two steps as task batching, listing your tasks and breaking them down into actionable steps, but from there you assign each task to a block of time. This method has aspects of the Pomodoro method, however, it gives each block of time an intention and more clarity. It also helps you to set boundaries within your workday, so you can allocate your time to everything you need to focus on, instead of getting sucked into one task and taking the whole day to complete it. So this method can be really great for those with big projects and give you a sense of clarity on how to accomplish them. And then you also get that sense of accomplishment as you go through each time block. Time boxing is very similar to time blocking, but it's a lot more rigid. It makes you evaluate how much time you actually want to spend on a task and hold yourself accountable. Like time blocking, the concept is to designate a focus period for a specific task or project. However, the time you designated for this is the only amount of time allowed to complete it. So if it doesn't get done in those designated focus periods, it doesn't get done at all. It definitely creates a sense of pressure. So for those who need a deadline to be their motivator to focus, this is a great one for that. This is also a great method for perfectionists. Because of the rigid timeline, it helps you focus on completing what's within the scope of an item rather than trying to make it perfect. Because if you have at least covered what's within scope, then you can call the item done. And trying to reach perfection can lead to scope creep, which actually keeps you from being able to focus on your other tasks. The next three methods I'm going to talk about are ones that can help you prioritize your tasks. And the first one I'll talk about is the Ivy Lee method. And this method is super simple. The day before, you list out your 6 most important tasks that need to be completed. Then the next day you start working through them one by one. You don't start the next one until you've completed the one before. And anything that does not get completed that day gets moved to the next day's list. And some guidelines I've used to figure out if a task is important are asking myself a couple questions. Is it related to my goals? Will it make other items on my to-do list obsolete, faster, or easier? And have I been putting it off for too long? Eat the frog is the next method. As I mentioned earlier, it's best to complete your most dreaded and difficult tasks at the beginning of your day, because that is when your ability to focus is at its highest. But Eat the Frog helps you determine what those tasks are by asking yourself, what do I need to do, but don't want to do? And usually the answer to that is what you should work on first. If there's ever multiple answers to that question, the advice is to complete the biggest one or the one that will take the longest first. The Eisenhower decision matrix is a more granular approach for figuring out where a task lies in your list of priorities. You simply go through your tasks asking which category it belongs to. Urgent and important, important but not urgent, urgent but not important, not urgent and not important. According to those answers, you can determine if the task needs to be completed immediately, scheduled for later, delegated to others, or eliminated altogether. A tip for determining a task that is urgent is to look at if it needs to be completed by an upcoming deadline. Otherwise, there will be a consequence. Examples could be finishing a project with a last-minute deadline or handling an urgent client request. And again, if there are multiple tasks in each category, the bigger and longer to complete tasks usually take priority. And those are all the tips and tricks I have for you guys. I can open it up for questions.
We're running a little early, so we have time for some questions. And I see some good recommendations inspired by this talk coming in the Slack channel as well.
Ooh.
I have a question, Jill. Is there anything you've tried that just didn't work for you?
As far as methods, I've found that the time blocking hasn't been my favorite. It's not to say that I haven't used it, but yeah, the time blocking hasn't been my favorite thus far.
Oh, Amanda.
Hi, I just want to say thank you, Joe. I really needed to hear this talk today. I've been struggling with focus lately. And I was curious, in any of your research, did you come across any tips and tricks for how to work in meeting time and also stay productive? Like, is there a better time of day for meetings, or how can you structure your day the best to focus on things that need to get done, but also meet with your colleagues as needed?
Yeah, pretty much the time blocking, time boxing, those kind of methods would be perfect, where you can actually write out your schedule for the day. I've noticed actually putting in my meeting times and then scheduling the rest of my parts with like the task batching and all that has helped me to stay productive even in between meetings. Whenever you have like those 30-minute blocks in between, it just helps you give clarity as to what you should be working on in those times in between the meetings.